Hello, all, and welcome to this afternoon's beer review, which I am dubbing another colonization beer review. So I finally got the hang of the game. I'm not losing anymore. So in order to make it more difficult, I downloaded a mod so I can go and start the learning process all over again. And part of that is just because it's not a very well balanced game. You have to play it one certain way, otherwise you lose. So it kind of gets boring quick, you know. Um, Figure a mod might go and make it a little bit more interesting. But anyways, what are we reviewing today? Well, we are reviewing something interesting. I reviewed a beer from this particular brewery once before, which I misspelled. I had so much trouble looking it up. Kind of too late to go and change the name on that review, but this is one, the other one that's really commercially available, widely available outside of Scotland, because this is a Scottish beer. And this is Traquair Jacobite Ale. Jacobites, of course, being the supporters of the old cause, supporters of the Stuart House of Stuart against the House of Hanover in the United Kingdom. And yeah, this is a Scotch ale, or a wee heavy as it's known. And this is an ale brewed with coriander and fermented in oak barrels. First brewed in 1995. Let's go and read the label now, shall we? Because it's got quite a lot to read here. Traquair Jacobite ale is a Scotch ale with an ancient ingredient, coriander. Rich, deep flavors are accented by exotic coriander aroma. Traquair House Brewery, located within Scotland's oldest inhabited house, uses a 1738 copper kettle and oak fermenters to produce this fine ale, first brewed in 1995 to commemorate the Jacobite Revolution. So in 1745, Bonnie Prince Charlie, who was I don't believe he was completely the last heir. I think there was a few more after him, but he was the last heir to go and make a try at the throne. So he came back. Hanover's kicked his butt. Forget what the name of the battle was. I don't think was it Floddenfield. I can't remember. Um, Anyways, so he stayed at that house after returning to Britannia, and there's these famous gates at the Traquair house that have not been opened since he last came, and the story is that it'll open again when the Stuarts return to the throne. Well, good luck, since they only have very questionable, claimants to the throne now. I've always found it. One thing I always found really interesting about the Stuarts is that, you know, Mary Stuart, who is kind of like one of the, I wouldn't say earlier, but one of the more famous members of the line, was renowned for her Catholicism. Her son was raised very Protestant. In fact, the King James version of the Bible refers to him, King James the First of the House Stuart. Yet later, members of the Stuart line kind of drifted back to Catholicism, which was kind of problematic because England had become very Protestant at that time. So, King Charles II kept his sort of faith secret. King James II decided that he was going to be openly Catholic, and the Hanovers, actually, no, not the Hanovers, but basically, House of Orange came over. William and Mary came over, kicked him out. Then Queen Anne came onto the throne. All her kids died, and so the Hanovers came in. And yeah. Anyways, this is your Best Buy September 2029. So this one's pretty fresh. Took this out about 20 minutes ago because it's one of those ones you kind of want a warmer serving temperature for. So, might be a little bit too warm at this point, actually. This is 8.0 ABV, pouring it into a tulip, which is a recommended shape for this style. Hmm. A copper brown color, fairly clear but dark. You can see the light coming through the bottom. With a beige head that is redolent of coriander, molasses, oak, hints of brown bread, and some earthy hopping. Let's get this onto the palate now, shall we? Surprisingly, not very oily. It's actually somewhat thin tasting. Well, I shouldn't say thin tasting, but thinner than what I would expect for something that's 8.0 and this darkly malted. There's still some oiliness to it. It's just less than I'm expecting. It doesn't even feel like an 8.0. It feels more like a 6.0 or even a 5.5, really. It's almost refreshing, which is kind of scary for something that heavy. It could really sneak up on you if you didn't know the actual bottle strength. This is actually on the drier side, which is surprising to me. Other Scotch heavies I've had before have been somewhat sweet. This is kind of dry and, interestingly, has a sort of herbaceous note throughout. So this is sort of herbaceous note that isn't quite coriander. I think the interaction of the coriander with the dark malts is kind of taking away the defining aspects of coriander and kind of just leaving a sort of enigmatic herbaceousness that persists through the front all the way into the long finish. There still is that molasses note in the mid to finish, but it's sort of unsweet. I don't know how you could describe unsweet molasses. I guess sort of like that cooked sugar, but also kind of that twang to it. The oak wood is very subtle, but it is there. In the mid and into the finish. And there's some hot bitterness in the long finish, kind of interacting with that herbaceous note, and also the residual roastiness of the malts. That roastiness is not really a coffee roastiness. It's almost like a molasses roastiness, a sugar roastiness, a Maillard taste, a Maillard reaction taste. You know, toasted bread, sweet toasted bread. Not really sweet toasted bread. Though I have to say, as it's warming up, and it's warming up very quickly because it's pretty hot out today, um, it's becoming more apparently sweet, but still balanced. I'm actually really enjoying this because the roastiness is very well balanced by the sweetness. One of my big problems with a lot of, which is why you don't see me reviewing very many dark ales, is because they either come across as too roasty, and I'm kind of sensitive to roasted flavors, or they come across as cloyingly sweet. This one kind of is balanced in that respect. What's interesting, especially as it's warming up, is that the various taste notes are not very crisply defined. They sort of blend into each other, they sort of bleed into each other, which makes it hard to really suss out, but they're there. You can taste the complexity of this for certain, but it's very difficult to put your finger on each and every exact note. For example, I would have not, if it didn't have it on the bottle, I would have not guessed that there is coriander in here. It doesn't have the smell of coriander. It doesn't really have the taste of coriander. It just has this sort of herbaceous note to it. Again, what I'm really enjoying about this one in particular is just the perfect balance of roasted malts to residual sugars. You know, so that you're getting a dose of both without one becoming too overwhelming. It's a pretty difficult thing, I think, to pull off, at least for someone who is as particular as I am about that. As it warms up, it's becoming a little bit more difficult to get that oak note out. It's just becoming a very subtle note in the finish as the malting kind of expands its taste boundaries. What I mean by oakiness is sort of a charred vanilla kind of taste, which blends into the malting, the roasted malting. So you kind of get a feel of what I'm saying there. A lot of these taste notes all blend into each other. The hops, the coriander, the oak, the dark malts. I also have to say, this drinks, again, I'd like to repeat, this drinks much lighter than the ABV is. It could really, well, it probably wouldn't sneak up to you because this is not exactly the kind of beer that you'd go and get multiple pools of. You know what I mean? This costs about $8 for this pint bottle here. I think it's well worth it. Especially since I could, especially since I could go and talk about history for a bit. Being something of a monarchist, I have an affection for discussing the various royal houses of whatever country. You don't even want to get me started on that, man. Anyways, I think I've said all that I can say about this particular beer. I think this is an excellent example of the wee heavy Scotch ale style, considering that it is pretty well distributed. I think you can find this pretty much anywhere in the United States. As it because I've seen it multiple places here in Hawaii besides Tamura's. So I think it would be something to be easy to get and a pretty good exemplar of that particular style that you actually don't see too much of in the West, or at least here in Hawaii. And I apologize for slurring. I'm drinking this on an empty stomach. I just got finished with all my chores and whatnot. And so I'm probably going to make dinner after this. Jacobite ale. For those of us who support the old cause, I suppose. I don't know. I'm more historically interested than a supporter of the House of Stuart or a Jacobite. And I completely lost that train of thought, which means it's time for me to end this review. Give it a shot, okay? Interesting beer and interesting history. Cheers. That's your beer review for tonight, folks.